طيب بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين وبعد. We are in the final point, the final paragraph before صفة الصلاة, and inshallah ta'ala starting next class there'll be more things for me to show you physically, so we'll be back to video then inshallah ta'ala. The author here, he says وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ يُشْتَرَطُ أَيْضًا فِي صِحَّةِ الصَّلَاةِ الْعِلْمُ بِفَرْضِيَّةِ الصَّلَاةِ الْعِلْمُ بِفَرْضِيَّةِ الصَّلَاةِ, meaning that the individual needs to understand and believe that prayer is obligatory upon them. فلو جهل فرضية أصل الصلاة أو صلاته التي شرع فيها لم تصح كما في المجموع والروضة. But if the individual does not know, does not believe that this prayer is an obligation, then his prayer is not sahih. His prayer is not sahih. And we went over all of the shurut that come ahead of time. And this element, they do not normally consider it part of the shurut. Some will, but a lot of times our a'imma will mention this more as part of the niyyah. Part of the niyyah. And some of them will count this part as from the shurut of the niyyah. Tamam. So part of the niyyah يعني جزء من ماهية النية, because my intention needs to state obligatory prayer, right? So part of what builds the actual niyyah is the fact that I'm doing an obligatory prayer. Others will word it as a shart, a condition. There's a minority of scholars that will mention it as part of shurut al-salah. Tamam. Is there a big on the ground difference between them? In reality, no, there isn't. In reality, no, there isn't. Because no matter where they place it, it is still due in the niyyah. And therefore, it's not a big deal where they place the fact that the individual needs to know and recognize that the prayer is an obligation upon them. And just as a quick review, what are the shurut that we went over? We went over al-tahara min al-hadath wal-janaba, or you could say purification from minor and major impurity, purification from filth, covering the areas that need to be covered for the prayer to be correct, knowing that the time has entered, and facing the qibla. He says, وَتَمْيِيزِ فُرُوضِهَا مِن سُنَنِهَا. Some of the ulama will simply add this point into the previous point, knowing what's an obligation and what's not, knowing what's an obligation and what's a sunnah. And some will have it separate. Tamam. And this condition we went over in wudu. This condition realistically appears in any act of ibadah that has obligatory acts and sunnah acts mixed together. The individual needs to know what is an obligation and what is a sunnah. Now, if a layperson believes it's all an obligation, it's not the end of the world. That's not a big deal. That's not what? That's not a big deal. Tamam. But if they believe that everything is sunnah, that's a problem. Tamam? That's a problem. So if you hear someone who has not studied correctly coming and saying, no, every act in the salah is fard, and you don't have really a necessary reason to get involved in debating them. Let it be. Okay, they just need to study some. But if they're saying it's all sunnah, and they mean by sunnah, not that it's sunnah as in they're following the Prophet and the way of the Prophet, but sunnah as in its ruling is sunnah, not an obligation, then that's where the problem is. That's why he says, na'am. إن اعتقد العامي, the layperson, أو العالم على الأوجه, or a scholar. Okay, but hold on. Does he really mean here scholar? It says the word scholar. Does he mean scholar? Not really. What he means by the word il-alam here, as in al-tuhfa and in nihaya, is a person who has started to study fiqh and deen. So the word alim here is not the terminology as in scholar, rather a person that knows. He knows fiqh. He knows that there's things that are fard. He knows there are things that are sunnah. But he comes to the salah and he doesn't really investigate for some reason. It happens. He got busy with life. But he reads and he has general knowledge and understanding of fiqh. But when it comes to salah, he just says the whole thing is what? Fard. That's okay. So alim here doesn't mean scholar. It means a person that knows. So that's a linguistical term he's using here. He says ala al-awja, meaning in the correct wajh. You'll notice that the mutaakhirin, starting from the likes of Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari a little bit, but then more so Ibn Hajar al-Ramli, al-Khatib al-Shirbini, Ba Makhrama, al-Abbadi, al-Ziyadi, Shubramallasi, al-Qalyubi, Amira, you'll see they start, instead of, if an issue has come to them, reached them without a tarjih, without a specification of this opinion is stronger than that opinion, and now they have to make it, they tend to use the term al-awjah or al-awjuh, and it's just another way to say al-asah, the stronger opinion or the more correct opinion. All right, it's more of their terminology, and we today need a new terminology. And I've mentioned this before when we were speaking about terminologies all the way in the beginning, because we're having a lot of new things, right? We don't make wudu out of a bucket anymore. We make it out of a faucet, right? So we're going to run into new opinions built on old fundamentals. And we're going to see this a lot as when we're studying fiqh, and then we come to the real world, we start saying, well, wait a minute. This book that I'm studying is like 500 years old. They had a different world back then. Okay? They didn't have cars and planes yet. So when we see contemporary Shafi'is differing, and I want to be a genuine academic and I just want to simply go ahead and document, but then I get to a point where I'm ready to say one of them is stronger, what do I say? What term can I use? I'd suggested before you can use al-aqyas. Al-aqyas. Why al-aqyas or al-qiyas? Something that there's multiple opinions that are strong, but one is the strongest. You could say al-aqyas. Multiple opinions, but only one of them sounds strongest to you. Once you become a scholar, you can say al-qiyas. You can say al-qiyas. Why? Because we're not reinventing the wheel. We are building upon that which the previous generations had provided for us. Tamam? So according to the stronger opinion, that the person that knows, right, هو الذي يميز هذه التفاصيل. He knows the difference between a fard and a sunnah, but he hasn't really looked into the chapter of prayer that much. He believes that it's all fard, that's okay. Their prayer is authentic. But now if they believe that it's all sunnah, no, then we have a problem. لماذا? Why do we have a problem? This is because there's obligatory acts. And if you believe that which Allah made an obligation upon you is not an obligation upon you, well, that questions one's Islam. تمام. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى العصمة. He says, وَالْعِلْمُ بِكَيْفِيَّتِهَا الْآتِي بَيَانُهَا قَرِيبًا. And the understanding or the kayfiyya of as-salah is what we are about to examine and study. He says, فَصْلٌ فِي صِفَةِ الصَّلَاةِ. Just give me one moment, please, if you do not mind. نعم عفوا. طيب. He says فصل في صفة الصلاة. أركان الصلاة أي فروضها 14 بجعل الطمأنينة في محلها ركنا واحدا. Some of the ulama, they'll take طمأنينة, and that is calmness in the act. I go into ruku' and then I pause slightly, just a little bit, okay, while I'm in that position. That is referred to as what? As at-tuma'nina. But is it part of the act that I just did, ruku', or is it separate? Some of the ulama make it part of the act itself, meaning I do ruku' and have tuma'nina in it. And some scholars say you do ruku', and that's one pillar, and then the next pillar, and pillar just means an obligation within the act itself, they'll say you do ruku', and then the next pillar is you have tuma'nina in your ruku'. Why does this matter? Because if you say it's part of a ruku', then this entails, and pay attention, I'm saying entails, not what they necessarily said. It entails that if I am very quick in my ruku' and I'm saying that it is a separate act, a separate rukn, then my prayer is not valid. If I say I just need the concept of tuma'nina to be present in the ruku' itself, not making it a separate pillar, then I can go fast. I can speed it up. You see? So on a technical sense, there would be a difference because the way that you're wording it would entail a difference. Not that they necessarily said it. Tamam. Ibn Hajar in al-Tuhfa has a beautiful discussion on this matter and how this breakdown would cause or would allude, right, would necessitate other things that a lot of the ulama, they didn't mean it when they made it separate. Tamam. They made it separate really out of convenience and making it easier for you to track. Now there's other things that some of the ulama mentioned, like in Matn Abi Shuja', that's a book that you would study before you get to this book normally. And in it says, for example, the intention of departure from prayer. The ulama, they don't like this for so many reasons, but one of the most easiest of those reasons for you to grasp, for me to mention quickly, is the moment that you intend to leave the prayer, if you're still not done with the prayer, then you have left the prayer already. Think about that for a moment. So the moment that you think about leaving the prayer, you've left the prayer. Well, does that apply everywhere? The moment that I intend to stop fasting, has my fast now ended? No. Why? What's the difference? The difference is that with prayer, I'm entering into a series of actions that are all connected to one another, that has a beginning and has an end. Me entering into it begins with an intention. Me suggesting or mentioning or thinking about me ending it immediately ends the initial intention, because any intention that negates the first intention automatically breaks the act's sequence. Right there, just for that point alone, adding in an intention to leave the prayer might be very dangerous. Because you could imagine a person is in his final sujood and he says, I'm leaving the prayer after this. Well, technically he's nullified his entry intention. So we should not be doing that or suggesting it. Now there's other reasons, but I'm just simply saying I'm mentioning this example because it's the easiest one for you to remember. Tamam. With fasting, there's nothing that I am doing as in consecutive series of acts within it. I'm just simply not eating. So my intention, unless it is direct violation of the intention of the fasting for that day, then me saying, you know what, I'm going to stop my fast wouldn't change anything unless I do a nullifier of the act itself, which would be doing the things that breaks my fast. Inshallah ta'ala, that is clear. He says, he's going on to the first one. أحدها نية. The first one is the niyyah. Tamam. He says, وهي القصد بالقلب. And it is for me to intend this by my what? By my heart. By my heart, within my heart. لخبر إنما الأعمال بالنيات. Because of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ saying what? إنما الأعمال بالنيات. And that's not the only evidence for the niyyah. I know most of the time you'll see the ulama mentioning this, tamam, but it's not only because of that. Imam Shafi'i in al-Risala, for example, what does he say? وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ. مُخْلِصِينَ. And this would indicate by necessity that you need to have ikhlas in amal. And ikhlas means dedication, meaning you're doing something with a purpose, right? So you need to have the niyyah of doing it deliberately. And there's other ahadith where the Prophet ﷺ speaks about the niyyah, but this is suffice. Tamam? He says, فَيَجِبُ فِيهَا أَيِ النِّيَّةِ قَصْدُ فِعْلِهَا. You intend, you deliberately choose to do something. تمام لتتميز عن بقية الأفعال. So that way, the purpose of the niyyah is so that way there can be a separation, a difference between you praying versus you not praying. There is a statement, let me see if I can pull it up for you real quick. It's a beautiful statement actually. Bismillah. Okay, no, I can't get it right now. I don't know where I put it. But anyway, the statement is from Al-Izz ibn Abd as-Salam. Ibn Abd as-Salam, he says the niyyah, its importance lies in the fact that throughout my day, I do things habitually. I do things for fun. I do things out of sense of responsibility. I have all of these reasons, intentions by or for the things I do throughout my day. And the niyyah helps me classify me pausing and doing something for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's the importance of the niyyah. Alright, and that was said by Al-Izz ibn Abd as-Salam. He says, وَتَعْيِينُهَا مِنْ ظُهْرٍ أَوْ غَيْرِهِ لِتَتَمَيَّزَ عَنْ غَيْرِهَا فَلَا يَكْفِي نِيَّةُ فَرْضِ الْوَقْتِ. See, realistically right now, what is he getting into? He's getting into how the different niyyahs function. Tamam. The niyyah will go back to that which you are doing, the type of prayer. This then brings us to an important mas'ala. What are the different types of prayer? First, you have the fard prayer, and fard prayers are two types. Fardu aynin, and you have fardu kifaya. Fardu aynin, each and every single one of us have to do. Fardu kifaya if one of us or if some of us do it, the others do not have to do it. But if those others do not do it, then it is an obligation upon all of us. But if everyone leaves except for me, and it's fardu kifaya, then I have to do it because there is only me. So it becomes fard ayn. Tamam? Then there's sunnah. If you remember in our last class, we spoke about what? That there are 3 reasons, right, for sunnahs. That which have a reason that comes before the prayer itself. Those which its reasons come after the prayer. And those which their reasons come at the time of prayer. Then there's voluntary prayer. So since prayer has all these different types, and there's more, when it comes to obligatory and sunnah prayers and even some voluntary prayers, I can pray them alone or in congregation. Some of those sunnah prayers could either be a verified sunnah, in other words, sunnah mu'akkada, or a regular sunnah, sunnah ghayri mu'akkada. So all of these elements would impact me and the action that I'm doing, and the way that I separate and identify the act that I'm doing, it comes with the niyyah. I might be praying this prayer as a resident or as a traveler. I might be unifying the prayers due to a legitimate excuse. I might be making up a prayer, redoing a prayer, right? I might be doing the prayer standing up with no bending, no movement at all, doing it all in my head due to a certain reason. So in order to classify what am I doing, right? I need to have the correct intention that would allow me to identify my act, so that way I can be rewarded accordingly. What, Allah doesn't know? Allah of course knows. Subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course He knows. Then why do I need the niyyah? Because that's for you, because you need to have the ikhlas. You need to have what? You need to have the ikhlas for the salah. Tamam? So now when he says قصد فعلها وتعيينها, this applies to what? This applies to the obligatory prayer, tamam, and any recommended prayer that has been identified by the Sharia. Any sunnah prayer identified by the Sharia. What are the sunnah prayers identified by the Sharia? سهل جدا. سهل جدا. There's going to be 2 types. رواتب, عفوا, مؤكدات and non-مؤكدات. Right? The مؤكدات are the rawatib, which would be 2 rak'ah before subh, 2 rak'ah before dhuhr, 2 rak'ah after dhuhr, 2 rak'ah before maghrib, 2 rak'ah after maghrib, 2 rak'ah before isha, 2 rak'ah after isha. Tamam? And what applies to dhuhr applies to jum'ah. Tamam? غير المؤكد is going to be what? The 2 more for isha, 2 more before dhuhr, 2 more after dhuhr, and 4 before asr. And then there's sunnahs that are connected to events or times or reasons. Salat al-Eid, lunar and solar eclipse, prayer of drought, witr prayer, duha prayer, prayer for tawbah, qiyam layl, tarawih, the greeting of the masjid, tahat al-masjid, salat al-tasbih, salat al-istikhara, right? Making up a previous sunnah, sunnah of traveling, sunnah of coming back from traveling, sunnah of after wudu, sunnah before leaving your home, sunnah after coming back home. So when you're doing any of these, you're going to have to identify the prayer. So what did he mention? قصد الفعل والتعيين. قصد الفعل والتعيين. قصد الفعل means I'm going to identify the verb that I'm about to do. والتعيين, it means I'm mentioning what I'm about to do. So in your heart, I'm going to pray قيام الليل. I'm going to pray قيام الليل. Prayer قيام الليل. You see? Well, what if I say I'm going to do قيام الليل? Would that work by just saying do instead of the prayer of قيام الليل? Most of the ulama will say yes, because your intention by do, it means pray, because that's all you know. Tamam? But you have to state within your heart, meaning you have to think. It has to be present within you that this is what you're about to do. ممتاز? He says, وَلَوْ كَانَتْ الصَّلَاةُ الْمَفْعُولَةُ نَفْلًا غَيْرَ مُطْلَقٍ كالرواتب والسنن المؤقتة, timed sunnahs. What would be a timed sunnahs? Like the sunnahs with the prayers, المؤكدات. أو ذات السبب, sunnahs that have a reason, like the eclipse, like drought, like witr, and so on. فيجب فيها التعيين بالإضافة إلى ما يعينها. يعني you need to state what you're about to do. And again, when I say state, it doesn't mean you actually have to say the words. It just means it's almost the feeling in your heart, right? That's present. He says, كسنة الظهر القبلية أو البعدية, the sunnah of dhuhr, before and after. وإن لم يؤخر القبلية ومثلها كل صلاة لها سنة أو سنة قبلها وسنة بعدها. Same thing with all of the rest of the مؤكدات. تمام؟ تمام. قال وكعيد الأضحى, like عيد الأضحى أو الأكبر. You see what he did there? He says, or like thinking that you're going to pray what? عيد الأضحى. Or, if you don't want to say الأضحى, for whatever reason, maybe in your town they just don't say الأضحى. تمام? Like in Egypt, for example, 9 times out of 10, no one uses the word عيد الأضحى. Then what do they say? They say العيد الكبير. Look what he says, أو الأكبر, the bigger Eid, because it's longer. Small Eid is only 1 day. The Eid al-Adha has 3, تمام, or 4. And if it's about the time you have off of school and work, it might be a whole week. تمام. So if in your custom and culture it's called the big Eid, the longer Eid, then you can just simply intend, I'm going to pray the prayer of the bigger Eid. لا إشكال. تمام. He says, والفطر أو الأصغر, or عيد الفطر, or the smaller Eid. فلا تكفي صلاة العيد. فلا تكفي صلاة العيد. Why? Why wouldn't it work? Because you're not identifying which Eid. There's 2 Eids. So if you don't identify which one it is, هذه مشكلة. تمام. And yes, some of our ashab, they tried to say, it doesn't matter. Salat al-Eid is one thing. Yes, but there's 2 Eids. There's 2 reasons to pray it for, right? And that's why you have to identify it. He says, وَالْوِتْرُ سَوَاءٌ الْوَاحِدَةُ وَالزَّائِدَةُ عَلَيْهَا وَتَكْفِي نِيَّةُ الْوِتْرِ مِنْ غَيْرِ عَدَدٍ. And Salat al-Witr, which is usually 3 rak'ah, you can intend it by the 1 or more, or you don't even have to mention the number altogether. As a matter of fact, it's preferred that you do not mention what? A number. So that way, while you're in the middle of the prayer, if you wanted to extend it, there's no issue. Normally there isn't, but some ulama argued that it would be a problem if you did that, if you did intend a certain number, and that's why it causes a discussion. Okay, so if I don't mention a number, my intention, what does it go towards? Well, normally it shouldn't go anywhere. However, in all cases, some of the ulama, like Ibn Hajar, for example, he said what? If no one mentions the number, then it goes to the maximum number of witr, which would be the 11. Because 11 is the maximum witr. And some ulama said it won't go to any number. Wallahu a'lam. He says, وَيُحْمَلُ عَلَى مَا يُرِيدُهُ عَلَى الْأَوْجَةِ يعني whatever the person wanted to do. تمام. ولا يكفي فيه نية سنة العشاء أو راتبتها. You cannot intend for witr the sunan of Isha. Why? I thought it comes after Isha. Yes, it comes after Isha, but it's not connected to Isha. It doesn't belong to Isha. It's a separate prayer. Tamam? Because it's what? It's a separate prayer. And then there's another prayer called Sunnat al-Isha. So you can't just try to connect it. However, if you were to say, I intend the witr of Isha, like that, that's okay. That would be acceptable, right? Because you are saying this is the witr that comes after Isha. That would be okay. لا إشكال إن شاء الله تعالى. والتراويح والضحى وكاستسقاء وكسوف شمس أو قمر. He's just giving more examples, and we already went over those. وأما النفل المطلق, complete voluntary prayer that you want to do, فلا يجب فيه تعيين. Because there's no ta'yin. I want to get up and pray to rak'ah lillah. Right? What ta'yin? What am I going to call it? The Sharia didn't give it a name. We can't go and just add a name on it. That's not how things work. So there's nothing for you to call it besides I'm going to pray to rak'ah lillah. That's it. تمام. قال بل يكفي فيه نية فعل الصلاة. The intention, I'm going to pray. هذا كافي. That's enough. كما في ركعتي التحية والوضوء والاستخارة. Look at here. He says, when it comes to these prayers, these three, all you need to intend is what? The prayer itself. But what he means by this is that these prayers are not independent, and we went over this before. Meaning, if I make wudu and join the prayer, the jama'ah, for example, at Maghrib, technically I'm fulfilling the sunnah of praying with my wudu immediately, because that's what was meant. Would I get rewarded for sunnah al-wudu? I need to intend it. I would need to what? Intend it. So I can intend it as I enter the obligatory prayer. Yes, you can. Because it was not an independent prayer to begin with. Tamam? Same thing with Tahiyat al-Masjid, same thing with istikhara. So if you enter the masjid and they're already praying and you join their prayer, if you intend that this goes towards your Tahiyat al-Masjid as well, you'll get rewarded for it. If you don't, you won't get rewarded for it. You won't get rewarded for it. So when you enter the masjid and do Tahiyat al-Masjid, you just simply intend Tahiyat al-Masjid. Tamam? If you don't, you're still fulfilling the command of praying. It's just that the prayer for that in particular thing, that's what you're not doing. Let me explain this again. If you enter the masjid and they're praying and you join the prayer, you have fulfilled the command of praying as soon as you enter the masjid. So you get rewarded for that. But would you get rewarded for Tahiyat al-Masjid? You didn't do an actual prayer of Tahiyat al-Masjid. You just joined the prayer immediately. You got rewarded for that. What about Tahiyat al-Masjid? Well, since you can't do it because they're praying jama'ah, you can't do that first and then join them. You have to join them right away. So then what do? You intend that this goes towards your Tahiyat al-Masjid. Then you get that extra reward of doing Tahiyat al-Masjid. Because it's not an independent prayer. Meaning, the Prophet ﷺ did not say that as soon as you enter the masjid, you must pray 2 rak'ah Tahiyat al-Masjid. He said, if you enter a masjid, before you sit, pray 2 rak'ah. And he said it in a way where it's not an obligation. Where it's not what? An obligation. And this is why it was understood from it that what is being asked from us to do, tamam, is that it's asked that I initiate some sort of prayer if there is no prayer already. Tamam? So we understood from these things that they are not intended independently. They're not independent prayers like the other prayers that we mentioned. قال وكذا صلاة الأوابين على ما قاله شيخنا ابن زياد والعلامة السيوطي رحمهما الله تعالى. And similarly is صلاة الأوابين. What is صلاة الأوابين? This is a prayer that many of the ulama differed on its validity to begin with. The prayer, or this prayer, happens between Maghrib and Isha. And in the narrations that are all questionable, it's described with a max of 20 rak'ah. There are other narrations that mention it as 6, and the other ones that mention it as 2, and there's other than that. There's a lot of talk between the ulama on the authenticity of these chains. On the authenticity of these chains. Most of the ulama will say if you want to do it, don't do it based upon the chains, do it as a voluntary act. Because it is heavily debated if it's sunnah or not. It's heavily debated whether it is sunnah or not. If we say it's sunnah, the way that it's described in these narrations is that it is a unique prayer. It's a independent prayer. This is why he's going to tell us that Ibn Hajar said what? وَالَّذِي جَزَمَ بِهِ شَيْخُنَا فِي فَتَاوِي. In Al-Fatawa Al-Fiqhiyya Al-Kubra by Ibn Hajar, he says what? لا بد فيها من التعيين كالضحى. No, you need to specify it like Salat al-Duha if you're authenticating the chains. Tamam? Some of the ulama said, but it's not what he said in the Fatawa. What he said in the Fatawa was more like this. Al-Awabin is like Duha. But many of his students differed. Ibn Hajar's students, they differed. Did he mean that it's like Duha in a sense where you need to specify it because it's an independent prayer? Or did he mean that it was just like Duha as in it is a time-based prayer, meaning at a certain time in the day you do it like Duha. Not that it's like Duha in the sense where you need to intend it. هذا محل الخلاف, because Ibn Hajar, it seems that he has his own journey with the narrations. In some of his works, it seems that he authenticates the chains. In other ones of his works, he shows great uncertainty about them. So, it really could go either way. And it appears to be that the students of Ibn Hajar, they differed on where he stood on Salat al-Awabin. Tamam? If we say it's independent and it's like Duha prayer, then you cannot merge it with another prayer. Tamam? And Allah knows best. He says, وَتَجِبُ نِيَّةُ الْفِعْلِ وَالتَّعِينِ مَعْ نِيَّةِ الْفَرْضِ فِي الْفَرْضِ. Now, an obligatory prayer, like remember what we said, we're going to do what? قَصْدُ الْفِعْلِ and التَّعِينِ. Pray, dhuhr. There's a third element that the obligatory prayer needs in the intention, and that is the specification of the status of the act. Meaning, if it's fard, I need to believe that it's fard upon me. Remember what we said all the way in the beginning? And I told you it's part of the niyyah. This is it. It's part of the intention. So in my heart, I'm going to pray dhuhr. In my heart, this is what I'm saying in my heart. I'm saying, I'm going to pray the obligatory prayer upon me, that's dhuhr. Or I'm going to pray dhuhr, which is the obligation upon me. Or I'm going to pray my daily obligation of dhuhr. Whatever variation, it's fine. You can mix and match that however you want. But those three concepts need to be present. The verb, the proper noun of what it is, and the value of the action, the obligation. And those three elements make up the core elements of your intention. Those three things for obligatory prayers. For sunnah prayers that are independent, you're going to need the first two only. The verb and the proper noun. Tamam? And for voluntary prayer, I just need the verb. I'm going to pray. That's it. He says, وَلَوْ كِفَايَةً. Even if it's fardu kifaya, you're going to have to state it. أو nadr, or it's an oath. What's an oath of salah? Oh Allah, if I get this job, I'm going to pray 2 rak'ah every day, just for your sake. Now it becomes a nadr. You have to do it. It's an obligation upon you. It's an obligation upon you to do. وَإِن كَانَ النَّاوِي صَبِيًّا. Even if the person intending is a child. هذا مشكل. This is a problem. What does mushkil mean in fiqh? You'll see the word mushkil a lot when you're studying fiqh. It means this is a problematic statement. It needs to be addressed. Okay? There's a lot of terms along the way while you're studying fiqh you need to master so you can understand what they mean. Mushkil, it's a problematic expression. Think of it like this. This is a child. That means he's not of age yet. That means the 5 obligatory prayers are not an obligation upon him. So how can it be an obligation upon him to intend correctly? How does that work? That doesn't work. That doesn't what? It doesn't work. The whole entire thing is not an obligation upon him. How is it with inside of it an obligation? They said, hold on. Is a sunnah prayer an obligation? We said no to them. We said, no, of course it isn't. They said, well, can they pray with 2 ruku' and 4 sujood in a rak'ah? We say no. They said, see, you can have an obligation inside of a recommendation. We say true. However, we're talking about a child. He's not a mukallaf altogether. That's our issue. Tamam. So because they're not a mukallaf, how am I obligating his intention? And this has never been actually addressed. And this is why, and when I say addressed, I mean there hasn't been a continuous back and forth between the opinions. This is why Al-Ramli, Al-Khatib Al-Shirbini, Al-Ziyadi, and many of the Egyptian school of the Shafi'i, they said, no, this is not an obligation upon a child. This is not an obligation upon a child. لماذا? Because the whole entire prayer is not an obligation upon him. Tamam. If his niyyah is completely wrong and he does the act, I'm still going to reward him and he might still be rewarded with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He might not even have his correct wudu. Or she might not have her correct wudu. Children. Tamam. And they might still get rewarded. Mumtaz. But the Ibn Hajar school, they argued, like we said for a mukallaf, for an adult, that if he's praying a sunnah prayer, he still needs to maintain the overall system of the prayer. 1 rak'ah, 2 sajda for the rak'ah, right? He needs to read al-Fatiha, even though the prayer is voluntary even. Then the same thing would apply here, because this is the intention. This is what enters you into the prayer. Tamam. Okay, well, what is Ibn Hajar's response to, but the child might not even have correct wudu? He said, well, that's overlooked, but the intention needs to be specified. Well, in all matters, in all cases, while we are training our kids, it is important that we correct their niyyah. So just have them teach it to them correctly from the beginning. And if it doesn't come out right, don't scold them. It's not the end of the world. They're not a mukallaf yet. So we can maintain both and utilize them accordingly, right? As they get older before puberty, that's when you can be more strict in them. And Allah knows best. He says, لِيَتَمَيَّزَ عَنِ النَّفْلِ. So that way there's a difference between obligatory prayer and recommended prayer. كَأُصَلِّي فَرْضِ الظُّهْرِ مَثَلًا. He's giving us an example. Look what he has there. He has the verb. He has the value of the action, the status of the action, and he is specifying what that action is. Praying, the obligation of dhuhr. مثلا أو فرض الجمعة or of Jum'ah. وَإِنْ أَدْرَكَ الْإِمَامَ فِي تَشَهُدِهَا. Meaning, if you entered the masjid, say for Asr, and the Imam is in tashahhud, what intention do you carry? The regular intention of the prayer. Yes, but I'm not going to actually catch it with the Imam. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If you're entering the prayer, regardless of at what point, if you're joining in congregation, you'll have the same exact niyyah. قال وسنة في النية. Now, there are things that are recommended to be added to the niyyah, to the intention. But, يعني, when we are teaching or when we are learning, we come to the realization that stating things that you were not asked to state in your intention could easily violate your intention. So if you are dealing, and this is what I expect inshallah ta'ala that you will continue your studies with me or with someone else and grow inshallah ta'ala beyond this session that we're having right here. And you will run into people that will have an urge to add things into their niyyah. You need to get people to focus on what the obligation is and to forget about anything extra for the time being until they master what is actually the obligation. Oh, but I want to add this. If you see them adding things without control, stop them from adding altogether. Because once you open that floodgate, they tend to destroy their own intentions, which could cause their act to be not valid. We have to be very cautious with this as people of fiqh, because we know that this is a very critical spot, and if someone says something wrong, adds the wrong thing, they're only causing problems for themselves. And then they're going to come 20 years later and drop on your lap their situation. You're like, Ya Allah, I don't even know if all of your prayers were valid. Tamam. So in order for you, for your own sanity and for the correct practices that you see in your community and the people in contact with you, just have them always start and focus on the obligation, and everything else is secondary. Push that all aside. Focus on the first three things that we mentioned for obligatory prayer. After that, you see the growth, right? And they want to add more. They love their prayer. Alhamdulillah. I mean, I know people that stand there for a minute going on giving in their heart half of a lecture of how they're coming to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to perform the obligation prayer. Jameel, mumtaz. But these things are not an obligation. And if a person is still learning, you want to start with the basics and then gradually increase. He says, وَسُنَّ فِي النِّيَّةِ إِضَافَةٌ إِلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى خُرُوجًا مِنْ خِلَافِ مَنْ أَوْجَبَهَا. Some of our ulama, they said, you have to say in your intention, I'm going to pray the obligatory prayer of dhuhr for the sake of Allah. So the many of our ashab said, Ya Habibi, who else is going to be in the sake for? Because if it's for anyone else, then your prayer is not the issue that we have a problem with. We have a problem with your claim to Islam. The salah is not the problem here. Tamam. So there's no point in adding lillahi ta'ala because it cannot be for anyone else. Tamam. So saying that would be an obligation is redundant because it can't be. Right? It can't be. They argued, they countered. They said, well, when you say ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, there is only one ilah, and that's Allah. Why are we finishing the statement if it can only be Allah? We should be able to stop at la ilah, right? But that doesn't hold up because right now we're not talking about a testimony that needs to be articulated correctly. We're talking about a command that you received from Allah to do something for Allah. Okay, so already the nature of the action was sent by Allah for you to do. So it's almost redundant. It's like adding something that does not need to be added. But because some of the ulama argued for its obligation and they argued heavily, the conclusion of the school is, خلاص, we're going to say it's sunnah to say it, but it's not necessary to say it. ولا يتحقق معنى الإخلاص. And it definitely has a benefit, meaning that the benefit here is I am asserting in my heart, oh Allah, I'm doing this for you. And sure, that has maybe, we could word it as a Sufi benefit, an Imani benefit, a Dhawqi benefit, sure. But is it an obligation? No. Tamam? And Allah knows best. عفوا. He says, وَتَعَرُّضٌ لِأَدَاءٍ أَوْ قَضَاءٍ. التعرض للأداء والقضاء, it means that if this is a fulfillment of an obligation that has just entered versus if this prayer that I'm doing is a make-up. Okay, which one should I intend that so that way there's a difference between the two? There's a problem in this. What's the problem? The problem, my dear brothers and sisters, is that in proper Arabic, the word ada and qada are technically synonymous. They mean the same thing. It's only in fiqh terminology do they have separate meanings. So the average Muslim who might have never studied fiqh, or they studied fiqh but really like a basic text or something, just the basics of what they need to do day to day, they might not actually know that there's a difference between qada and ada. Tamam? Because think of it like this. I owe you money. I give you the money. In Arabic we say qadaytu dayn. I have fulfilled the deen. Look, I use the word fulfilled, right? The dayn. But I can also say adaytu ad-dayn. This is in Arabic. This is not fiqh. So, because it could go either way in Arabic, the average person might not recognize a difference. And since there's no difference in Arabic, I can't obligate anyone to make that separation within their intention. Because in Arabic, it's tomato, there's no difference. So khalas. But in fiqh, there's a difference. In fiqh, there's a difference. And this is why, look what he says here. He says what? وَلَا يَجِبُ, and it's not an obligation to mention it, وَإِنْ كَانَ عَلَيْهِ فَائِتَةٌ مُمَاثِلَةٌ لِلْمُؤَدَّاتِ. Even if he had a made-up prayer, like he's about to pray Asr, but he has a make-up prayer Asr that he needs to do, and there's now the obligation of Asr that just came in. He wouldn't have to make that separation. خِلَافًا لِمَا اعْتَمَدَهُ الأذرعي, الإمام الأذرعي من أئمة النظار. He said that it would be wajib to mention that in your niyyah, so you can separate between the ada, right, and the qada. But يعني لا يجب لماذا? Because Arabic does not allow it. How the words are used synonymously. Now, if the person is a faqih, that's a different story. Like they will actually say, if the person is a faqih and he knows how what qada stands for and what adat stands for, that would matter for him. That would matter if that's what he's intending. If that's what he knows the difference and it's in his intention already, then he must make it clear. But just someone speaking Arabic, they don't. Which then begs another question. What's the other question? If someone is doing the niyyah in English, and they're not using the word qada, and they're not using the word ada, would they have to specify? The answer is no. The answer is what? No. They wouldn't have to mention either of them. But if they do, then they have to stick to that which they mentioned. So if they had an Asr from yesterday, and today's Asr that just came in, مثلا, as an example, and they intended with the first Asr they prayed the makeup from yesterday, then when they come and pray again, they can't intend the Asr from the makeup from yesterday. They can't do that because they already did that. Tamam. So if in the second one, if they intend a makeup, even though the first one was a makeup, then they've prayed two makeups and they have not prayed today's prayer yet. Tamam. Which then opens up another discussion. What is it? If I pray Dhuhr with congregation, let's stick with Dhuhr just to avoid the after Asr, after Fajr discussion that we had in our last class. I go into the masjid, I prayed Dhuhr already at home, but I came because I was going to do something at the masjid, and they're still praying the Jama'ah. So I'm going to go ahead and join them. What do I intend? I've already prayed the prayer. The ulama, they say, you should treat or intend the second one as your obligation. But I intended the first one as my obligation. They said, intend the second one as a redo for possibility of more ajr. The possibility of what? More ajr, more reward. But what if I intended, now I added into my intention when I was at home, that is my ada. That is my fulfillment of the command right now. They said it's okay. You can intend this one is your fulfillment of the command right now, the second time you're praying, to get more reward. Or if you have an old prayer that you need to make up, then you can intend this one is your makeup. So I want you to pause here for a moment. Refresh moment. Once we started to add the discussion of fulfillment versus makeup or redo, right? You see how all of the confusion starts to get in? Excessive details start to get in, right? This is what I meant in the beginning, where let's avoid adding things when we don't have to. And if we're going to add things, let's add things that, like for the sake of Allah. Yani, adjusting my ikhlas, right? Seeking you, my Lord. Sure. But let's not add things that now opens up a discussion that one thing leads to the next thing, leads to the next thing, or one thing that impacts another thing that impacts another thing. There is no reason for the average person to intend ada or qada. There's no reason for that. The Sharia did not ask you to do this. Doing so, especially, or telling people to do so, especially if they're laymen, it's only going to cause confusion. Tamam? That's what I meant in the beginning. He says, وَالْأَصَحُ صَحَّةُ الْأَدَاءِ بِنِيَّةِ الْقَضَاءِ وَعَكْسِهِ إِنْ عُذِرَ بِنَحْوِ غَيْمٍ وَإِلَّا بَطَلَتْ قَطْعًا لِتَلَاعُبِهِ. Now, that إِنْ عُذِرَ بِنَحْوِ غَيْمٍ, realistically, it's more of like a ta'leel. But let's focus on the first part. You can pray a prayer, and while the prayer is a fulfillment, the prayer that just entered, your intention was making up, fine, that's fine. Or the other way around, that's fine. If there's an excuse, okay, why is he saying excuse? Because as I said, if the person is unaware of the fiqhi difference between the two terms, it's not going to hurt. If they do and they mean ada, but they use the word qada by accident, that's not a big deal. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says what? فَإِذَا قَضَيْتُم مَنَاسِكَكُمْ. And it actually means if you fulfilled. It doesn't mean if you made up. So, if they didn't mean it in a fiqhi way, even though they know the meaning of the two, that's okay. But if they did it deliberately, assuming for the fact that that's the case, like, oh, I think I missed dhuhr. Well, let me go ahead and pray, and I'll just intend qada because I made a mistake. right up in here, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if they're switching qada and ada, playing around, not having a legitimate reason, not that they're doing it because of linguistics, that there's no difference for them. No, they're doing it deliberately. They know that there's a difference and they're just doing it just because they want to do it. No, here we'll say their prayer is batil, their niyyah is batil because they're playing around. I know it's a lot of technical points. And I'll try to do the Q&As that I was doing in the chat, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. But first I'm going to try today or tomorrow to send a translation of all of this so you can read over again and listen to this again, inshallah ta'ala. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Take it one step at a time. It's a lot of details, but we're going to tackle every single one, inshallah ta'ala. And by the end of this, we're going to know our prayer from takbir to taslim and have that comfort in our hearts when we enter the prayer, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. تمام. وتعرض لاستقبال وعدد ركعات. Imam al-Shafi'i in his niyyah, according to what was narrated by Ibn Khuzaymah from Rabi' al-Muradi, that Imam al-Shafi'i used to stand and face the Qibla. This is in his verbal one, we don't know in his heart, but in his verbal one he used to say what? Facing your Qibla. Do you have to add this? No, you don't. It's recommended that you do, like all the other things that are recommended that we add. But is it a requirement? No. Tamam. So you don't have to do it. But if you did do it, la ba's. But it's just recommended. Tamam. وعدد ركعات, the quantity of rak'at. And there's a lot of arguments between our ashab on the same part of mentioning that it's for Allah. Because dhuhr, as in what dhuhr is, it's only for rak'at. So why would I mention 4 rak'at? It can only be 4. It can never be 3. It can never be 5. It could be 2 if I'm traveling, right? But it can never be anything other than 4. So why mention 4 in the first place? Tamam? Some will say, well, because you can pray it as 2. But when I do it as 2, I have an addition in my intention, which is the excuse that I'm utilizing to utilize the license, right? So why do I need to mention 4? You don't need to mention it. Tamam? He says, لِلْخُرُوجِ مِنْ خِلَافِ مَنْ أَوْجَبَ التَّعَرُّضَ لَهُمَا, to depart from the debate of those that say it is an obligation to mention it. If you notice that at the top when we spoke about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, referencing that it's for the sake of Allah, and here both of them he said to depart from the debate that we have with those that say they are an obligation. So it's like a compromise. Some scholars said it's an obligation to do. Other scholars said, no, it's not. So as a compromise, we'll say it's recommended. And when you look over the evidences and the behavior of the ulama and their understanding, you can tell that overwhelmingly that they just looked at it as something extra that you're doing. And Allah knows best. We're going to start in our next class on a nutq. And we might expand on a couple points there just because there's a lot of commotion on that point. And then we'll go into takbirat al-ihram, inshaAllah ta'ala. Don't forget, Telegram is there for you to drop your questions and to mention any issues that you might have or things that you want to expand more on. Here we're going to pause for today. وأقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله تعالى لي ولكم فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.